Hello, hello. Welcome everyone to 60 minutes of unscripted .NET entertainment. Our mission is to empower the .NET community to achieve more. And I need to mute something here. I'm your host, Myra Wenzel, with my co-hosts, Cam Soper and Cecil Phillip. And I'd like to welcome today's guest, Niels, who's going to be talking about developing webhooks locally with tunnels. And I'm excited to hear more. Do you want to say something before we start, Niels?
Just hello, I'm Niels. Nice to meet y'all.
All right, welcome to the show again. It's always a pleasure to have you here. All right, so let's jump into our, I forgot, it's been a while, guys. Let's jump into our related bits section before we start.
All right, I'm doing the related bits this week. And what I always forget is to put up the URL. And there's the URL right there. All right, so the theme of this week's stream is going to be using tunnels in development. And just to briefly summarize what we're talking about when you're developing a service of some kind on your local machine and external resources need to get at it, right? So maybe you're doing some kind of integration scenario, like some kind of B2B scenario, or you're using some sort of a cloud service, or like Niels is going to talk about today, a webhook, and you need to expose that to the internet as part of your development process. You need to know if it works. You need to be able to debug it and so forth. So Niels is going to talk about a few tools, one of which you've probably heard about, Ngrok. Before we get into that, though, we're going to look at this document, which I'll be honest, I just saw it for the first time right before we went on the air. I did not know that Visual Studio has tunneling capabilities built in now. So that's what this document walks you through. This document walks you through using the Dev Tunnel feature of Visual Studio 2022. It lays out some of the use cases like I just did. Talks about creating a tunnel right in the Visual Studio UI. I'll scroll down a little bit more. Somewhere in there, they show the, there it is. There it is. There is the tunnel URL format, a bunch of random stuff followed by .devtunnels.ms. It also walks you through using your dev tunnel from a mobile device or tablet or something like that. Gives you a little bit of information on how the dev tunnels are administered in Visual Studio, how to debug, and I don't know that there's anything else to talk about in this article, so I think we'll just end it right there and throw it to the hallway track. So who should queue up the, oh, me, that's me.
You can say that we've been like out of practice. I haven't done one of the shows since last year, so but I loving the energy from people all over the world. But we're gonna give it to Niels the stage so he can share more. I'm excited to learn about dev tunnels. I haven't personally used that in Visual Studio or Ngrok, so take it away, Niels.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, so I'll be talking about how to develop webhooks locally with tunnels, and as shown just now, with a feature that is brand new in Visual Studio, actually, dev tunnels. But I'll also talk about alternatives in case you don't use Visual Studio or ASP.NET Core. So a little bit about me. I'm Niels, but you may also know me as Swimberghe, and I work for Twilio. I'm the .NET editor for the Twilio Developer Voices, which means I'm just blogging on the Twilio blog about .NET and anything that could be helpful for you .NET developers.
Oh, it's Jack.
And
no. In the slide, there was your dog was in the picture.
Yes.
Yeah. Can you talk about Jack for just a second?
Yeah, I'm not sure if you can see Jack. Jack, he's right here, but he's just out of camera. So yeah, that's my dog, Labradoodle, 2 years old now, very sweet boy.
Oh.
And he's snoozing right now, staring me down. So we're gonna talk about a couple of things. First, we'll agree to what webhooks are. Then we'll take a look at how to develop them in Visual Studio with dev tunnels, and then I'll go a little bit deeper to show you how you actually can configure those webhooks automatically using a feature that is in Visual Studio dev tunnels, and then talk about webhook security and then the alternatives to dev tunnels. But first, what are webhooks? So I have a little diagram here, very simple, where your development machine is at the bottom, and it's calling it an API. So your machine is an API client using the .NET HTTP clients, most likely. And to get data from the API server, because you want to integrate with some external system, you're sending HTTP requests, and that API server is responding with the data in their HTTP response. Now, with webhooks, things are kind of the opposite, because the external system is going to send an HTTP request to your .NET application or whatever application you're using. So the HTTP request is coming to you. You need to handle that HTTP request, and you need to respond with an HTTP response that the webhook server is expecting. And so in this case, the webhook, the person that's in, or the system that's initializing or initiating the HTTP request, that one I'm calling the webhook server, and you're the webhook handler. And so it's very similar to developing web applications because it is HTTP request and response based. So the most important thing I wanted to highlight here is that with APIs, you initiate the connection, you decide when that HTTP request is sent, and then you get a response. And so the data is as up to date as when you requested it. With webhooks, on the other hand, some event occurred in the external system, and that external system wants to let you know about that event. And so that event data is going to be passed to you. And so the external system initiates the connection instead of you do. And so very shortly summarized, webhooks are user-defined HTTP callbacks. And the reason that they're user-defined is because you, the user, are going to define in that external system, hey, please call this URL with your HTTP requests. One well-known example of webhooks is GitHub. GitHub has a webhook for every single thing that you can do in GitHub, which is very extensive. So, but the most well-known is probably like a git push, a pull request, anything that happens with an issue, a new issue is created or a comment is added. So when you subscribe to those webhook events, you could respond to them and then integrate by maybe responding to a pull request automatically, asking somebody to sign an agreement before they can actually contribute that code to your repository. Or maybe whenever your build fails, an alarm goes off at home or at work, which probably gets pretty annoying soon, but it's possible. Now, the webhook that I'm personally most familiar with is those of Twilio, because that's where I work. And it's a pretty interesting take on webhooks, because this allows you to receive text messages in a format that is very familiar to you. And so you don't really have to know much about telecommunication technology. You just need to know how to handle HTTP requests, because every text message that comes in will be passed to you as an HTTP request. And then you can tell Twilio, hey, please respond in this way using the HTTP response. And we'll talk about how you do that in the next slide. And now the same goes for voice calls, phone calls, and many other things. All right. So I'm going to go to the Twilio console. And what I did here is I already bought a phone number. So you click on buy a phone number. You can create a free Twilio account and you'll get some trial credit to actually play with this if you are interested. But I click buy to get a phone number. Then you have a phone number. And now here in the configuration screen, I'm going to configure the webhook. And so there's a webhook for when a call comes in, and then there's a webhook for when an SMS or message comes in, because this could also be from WhatsApp. And to demonstrate how that works, I'm going to use this website, which is really helpful, webhook.site. And this website is going to give me a random URL, and I'm going to paste that random URL into my webhook. There we go. And so I configured it as an HTTP post. And now when I send a text message to that phone number, which I'm going to do here, so this is my phone being streamed to my computer and the SMS app on my phone. So I'll just say hi. And nothing's going to happen right now, but what you'll see in the webhook.site is that all the information from the HTTP request is posted here. So this is really easy to quickly test out any webhook that you'd like to see what is actually, sent as part of this HTTP request. And in this case, you can see that Twilio posted some information about that phone number. Like that phone number is from the United States. The body of the SMS was hi, that's what I said. And then the phone number to which it was sent, the phone number from which it was sent. And this is not my real phone number, so don't get any funny IDs.
Cecil was already trying to do that.
I was trying to plot with the folks in the chat, but you killed that idea.
I think you will actually reach my phone number, but it's proxied, so just keep it PG.
So this is a pretty cool site. So essentially what it does is, and I'm guessing this is for any type of webhook thing, like I could use that as like a stand-in for like my real website or whatever the case is, but then I'll be able to like see what that stuff looks like, which I think is kind of cool, because I know for me a lot of the times not everyone has like the greatest documentation, and so I have no idea what I'm expecting to receive, right? And so I don't know how should I like shape or form my code. I don't know what format it is or headers to expect or anything like that. But here, this is kind of like, I guess it's kind of like a middleman, so to speak, right? So you can start to inspect like what those possible results are or what those possible requests are, and then kind of like shape your code to, you know, to kind of suit it.
Exactly. Now, one thing that I want to show you is you can. Oh, somebody sent something. You know,
Wasn't me, I
I'm
swear
gonna I'm gonna avoid scrolling down because I'll actually, since we don't know your name, you know, I think it's safe to just show the phone number. That's not considered PII, the phone number by itself. Just make sure that your name is not in there in your text message. Let's see. Body. Hi, friends. Thank you. Hello. So I'm gonna get back to my train of thought. Yes, I wanted to show you. I have this command here in my notes. Let's see. So you saw what kind of data you get when you when Twilio sends you that HTTP request. Now Twilio also expects you to send a response back, and the response will be instructions given to Twilio that Twilio will execute for you. Now those instructions are in Twiml, which is XML, and Twiml stands for the Twilio markup language. It's just really XML with some specific verbs and nouns that you can use to give instructions to Twilio. So the one on the left here, that's how you would respond to whatever incoming message with the given text. Now for a voice call, you could use say, and that will then use text to speech to actually speak out loud what is said there, and then you can gather some information from the user, and then that will be posted to that path, which is pretty interesting. So let's show how to actually do that. So I'm going to use this Ngrok command, and we'll talk about Ngrok later, so don't worry about the command too much now. Let's see, I don't think this is the right path. Let's get the right path. Copy path. Okay, let's get rid of those quotes. Do I need to include that? Okay, let me get rid of that C. Maybe I need to do this. No, okay. Let me check the command here. What did I do? Oh, I included C, but the slashes had to be opposite.
It was close. One more.
Just one more slash. Okay, there we go. No, what's happening?
I see it, Niels. It's so you're on the command line. You're trying to hit your desktop directory, but it's actually in your OneDrive desktop directory.
Well, I right-clicked this copy as path, so this should be the correct path. So that should be the path. That shouldn't be a issue. My bad. It must be a directory, so I can't do the file itself. Anyway, so now that I have this, I actually have that XML file that has some Twiml in it. And I have that at a public URL thanks to Ngrok, and we'll talk about Ngrok later. But I have that public URL that I can now configure here. So when I set this, and it has to be an HTTP GET in this case, because I'm serving a file. Ngrok will not respond to a post by default if you just serve like a file system. So now I'll say hey again. And I should get a response. There we go. It says ahoy. So that's how that Twiml works. Now you could do some other things. Let me get back to the slides. So on this Twiml, you could also specify from what phone number it should be sent to what phone number it should be sent. You could have multiple messages. So it's not just for responding. All right, but you get the basic principle. Now, I've been, avoiding this issue so far by using webhook.site and by using this public URL for this XML file. But the biggest challenge with developing webhooks is that webhook servers can't reach your local machine by default. First, your router, if you are using if you're working on your personal network, your router will block the incoming HTTP request. So you need to open up a port, and then you probably need to open up that port on your Windows firewall as well. It's a little painful. I think it's possible, but it's a little painful. Now, if you are on a network at work, you probably don't even have the option to do any of that, because that would be way too insecure. So that's where the solution from tunnels comes in. So what are some problems with webhooks? You can't reach your local machine by default. Let me just skip straight to the Visual Studio webhooks. So Visual Studio DevTunnels is a solution to that problem. DevTunnels will give you a public URL that will be forwarded. Any HTTP request will be forwarded to your Visual Studio instance. Now, a DevTunnel will forward that request to your local host URL, but it's only supported on ASP.NET Core at the moment. It does support persistent and temporary tunnels, which is a feature that with alternative technologies is actually not offered in their free tier. So this is pretty cool that it's a part of the feature that is free in Visual Studio. And it also has some interesting features like built-in authentication and authorization.
So for 1 second, so when you say like persistent tunnels, are you talking about like I have an assigned URL that always belongs to me? Or are you talking about the connections? Like, what do you mean exactly by a persistent tunnel?
Yeah. So the tunnel, if you pick it to be persistent, Visual Studio will create a random URL, but when you close Visual Studio, when you shut down your computer, when you come back to it anytime later, that URL will still be there for you. So it won't be trashed and you can use it again. Now with a temporary URL, the moment you close Visual Studio and you start it again, you'll get a new random URL.
Okay, that makes sense.
So this is a brand new feature, which is probably why not that many people have heard of it yet. But it is a great feature, but it's in Visual Studio 2022 and in 2022 preview. But because it's so new, they are a little different. They will be the same eventually, but the latest bits is what I'm going to show in the preview. Now, if you do use 2022 and you don't use the preview, you can still get this done with using the launch settings.json, and that is documented if you look for the blog posts.
Gotcha. I'm guessing this is only for like Visual Studio proper, right? Not like for VS for Mac or anything else?
Yes, that's correct. I think I had this.
Yeah, you had it there.
Yeah. Here, so it's not for VS Code and it's not for VS Mac at the moment. I can't speak for what's going to happen in the future. I just hope this feature gets really popular and it becomes available everywhere in all Microsoft products. We'll see. So what you do is first you'll go to your options in Visual Studio. Then you look for DevTunnels. And currently it will be under preview features. And then you hit this checkbox to enable it. Now, to create a DevTunnel, you find the button to run your application, but you go on the little drop down and you see this DevTunnels submenu. And then this submenu, you can click Create Tunnels or show the existing DevTunnels by clicking on the DevTunnels window. So I'll do that. It will show me a list of DevTunnels that I've already created. But you can also create a new one, which will look like this. So it will ask you for either a Microsoft account or a GitHub account to make sure, like this is to prevent abuse, I think. And then you give it a name. So I'm not actually going to create it. And then you choose whether it's a temporary or a persistent URL tunnel. And then this is the interesting authorization and authentication part. So you can actually decide what kind of access level the tunnel has. When you set it to private, before you can actually access your application, you'll need to log in with either this Microsoft account or GitHub account if you pick a GitHub account. If you pick organization, which is only available when you use a Microsoft account, then anyone in your Azure Active Directory can access it, but they need to log in with that organizational account. And when you set it to public, just anyone can access it. So public is what I'm going to use for the webhooks, because the external systems are not going to be able to authenticate as a GitHub user or as a Microsoft user. But we'll talk about the security of that later. So I already did this, which gave me this webhook dev tunnel. Now, when I start to enable this dev tunnel, you find it in this drop-down, and then you click it. So now I'll have a checkbox next to it. And the next time I start my application, it will show you a public URL instead of a private URL, or localhost URL. So this is the dev tunnel URL that Visual Studio gave me. And everyone should be able to access this. But my application doesn't do anything at the root. So it will just give me a 404. I'll show you the endpoints that I have configured, just this one message endpoint. Now, to actually use this in my Twilio webhook, I'm going to add this path. And that's the path that will go to this, this endpoint. And I'll configure it inside of my phone number configuration. And I'll set it to HTTP post because that's what my endpoint expects. So I'll hit save. And now I'm going to put a breakpoint inside of this endpoint. And I'm going to send another text message. I put my breakpoint wrong. I put it on the outer. Let's see how can I. Okay, there we go. Now it's on the inside of the endpoint. Let me try that again. There we go. Now my breakpoint is hit. And so it's the HTTP request is being forwarded by dev tunnels to my local host. I'm not sure if I can see maybe here. Yeah, so here you can see my local host is this, but that's where the dev tunnels is forwarding the HTTP request to. Now, I also enabled HTTP logging on this application, so every HTTP request that comes in is being logged. You can't see all of the headers because they're redacted, but you can see over here, you can see the response body, but I'm looking for the request. Here's the request body from that HTTP request. So it's the same data that you saw earlier on the webhook.site, but now it's sent to my ASP.NET Core minimal API. Now you can also see the response. This is the Twiml response that will be resulting out of that code that you saw. So here I'm using the Twilio library that will help you construct that Twiml by saying new message response and then message. And then this little thing is an extension method that I added using the Twilio.ASP.NET Core library, which I'll show you later as well. But the result of this, when you do this and then to string, not this to string, then you'll see that XML. So, and because that is a response, you are getting that text message back saying ahoy.
I love the simplicity of it.
This is why I really like minimal APIs, and I was pretty excited about when that came in. It works really well for webhooks because you just need something small, so it's great for integration. Now let me comment this one out. And I'm going to uncomment this one, because most likely you actually want to read what's coming in from that data. So what you do is you ask for the form, and then all the parameters that Twilio sent to your webhook handler will be in that form, and the body is the body of the message. So let me put a breakpoint here, and then I'll start this again. And I'm going to send that text message again. Hi. So now you can see inside of the form, it has 19 keys. That's all that data. And you can get all of that information and respond to that incoming message the way you like. Now, I'm using this code because I'm in minimal APIs, and in minimal APIs, there's no such thing as binding from a form to an object. But in a controller, you could actually do that. So in a controller, you could say SMS request, and ASP.NET MVC will automatically bind all of the form data to this class. And this class is provided by the Twilio.ASP.NET library as well. So then you can quickly get whatever data you would like. It's a little less performant because it's using model binding and MVC. Here you get it directly from the form. It's as optimal as you could be. All right, so I skipped over something earlier because I didn't want to tip my hand. But so we solved one problem with the webhooks, and that is that the webhooks are running locally. It's hard to develop. How do we make them publicly accessible? Well, we use those dev tunnels. But now that they're publicly accessible, anyone can access them, including malicious actors. And this might not be the biggest threat while you're developing it yourself. But at the end of the day, when you're going into production, you're going to deploy this webhook handler application, and it's going to be publicly accessible as well. So how do we make sure that malicious actors are not taking advantage of this to, try to hack your server or try to expose PII from your customers, etc. So every webhook provider does this in a different way. All right. So every webhook provider does this in a different way. I know that GitHub has their way. Stripe has a different way of securing the webhooks, but all of these webhook providers do support certain features, and it's up to you to implement those features to make sure that your webhook is secure. Now for Twilio, what that means is you got to retrieve the Twilio signature header, which let's go back to that webhook.site. This is an example of that signature. So this will be passed into your application as a header. And the way that signature is calculated is it's combined the URL with all the parameters. So either the form parameters or the query string parameters. And then it's using hash-based message authentication code to calculate a hash. And I had a little example of this secure webhook. So the code for this would look something like this. So you have the request URL, you have the form parameters, you put them all together, and then you'll get a URL that looks like this. It looks a little funky because you're used to having like a query string here, and then an equal sign, but that's not how the URL should look like for this signature. So it should look like this. And then to get using your auth token that Twilio provides to you, you're gonna sign this using this method, hmac_show1.hashData, and then convert that to a base64 string. So when you run this.
So what you're saying to us is this is how Twilio generates all of its security codes, right? Like this is how we could do it.
Yep.
I was joking, by the way. I wasn't saying that this is how people are gonna spoof Twilio code. I was just joking. Please don't copy and paste the code, folks. Don't do it.
Yeah, that's also pseudocode. It's just to show you what it would look like. So this is something that it would produce. So Twilio does this using whatever coding language that they're using internally, and then you do the same thing on your end to verify that it actually came from Twilio. And so by verifying that the signature that you calculated is the same as that in the header, that's how you would know, oh, this is actually legit. Anytime that it's not legit, then you want to reject that HTTP request.
So do you do that? I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
So do you do that on every time you get a call, like on your endpoint?
For every HTTP request. Now, luckily, you don't have to write this code yourself because the Twilio library provides this in this method. And then in the Twilio ASP.NET Core library, which is the library that I contribute to myself, there's actually different helpers that can make it even easier to integrate. So I'm going to scroll down to validate Twilio HTTP requests. So the first thing that you would do is configure that auth token, either here or here, and you can also change these, but you don't need to use those. And that's the auth token that Twilio provides to you and that it will use to generate that hash. And then inside of your startup, you would do .add Twilio request validation. If you leave this empty, if you don't specify this, then it will use those app settings.json or whatever you pass into your .NET configuration. But you can override it this way if you like. In MVC, you would add this attribute, and then it will do the validation for you. In Minimal API, you need to add this validate Twilio request endpoint filter. So you can either add it directly to an individual endpoint or to an endpoint group like this. And then there's also a middleware, which will apply to every request that passes through the middleware. So I've done this. I added the Twilio request validation here. And then on my endpoint, the endpoint I was using before, I have this validate Twilio request method that adds the endpoint filter. Now, I want to do something like this, HTTP requests. And I didn't practice this, so let's see if it will work. But I wanted to show you how this doesn't work when you don't enable the forwarded headers. So I'm going to turn off this thing and run this again. Let's see. Maybe I was a little too fast. Let's try again. Oh, okay. This is a little silly. Okay, the breakpoint is not going to hit because of the validation I added. So let me undo this first. Sorry for stumbling.
No worries.
And start this again. So I wanted to show you this. It's pretty silly. So I wanted to show you that the validation wasn't going to work, but as a result, I couldn't show you actually why. But so when you turn off the validation and then you don't have the forwarded headers, you can see that on the HTTP request, this is set to localhost. Now, localhost is not the same as what's configured in here. So Twilio is going to use this URL to generate that signature. But now the request validator is using this URL, this localhost URL, to generate the signature, and it doesn't match. So that's why it didn't pass, and you'll get a forbidden response. But when you enable these forwarded headers, and let me add Twilio, validate Twilio request back. Now, when you enable the forwarded headers middleware, this middleware will actually look at the forwarding headers and it will set it on the current request. So let me run this again. Say hi. And if you look at the current request now, you'll see that the host is not localhost anymore, but it is that dev tunnel URL. And it is because inside of the headers, I'm not sure if we're going to be able to see this. Inside of the headers, result view, you have this X original host, you have this X forwarded scheme, X forwarded port, and X, let's see, it should be a host here as well. Where's the, yeah, and so the host is set to this. So now it's going to use all of these headers to actually update the current request. And that is the URL that the middleware for validating Twilio requests expects. Now, one alternative way that you could use is you receive the options here, so you could overwrite it. And then you say options.base. Oh. It might be like this, options. Let's see, yeah, that's better. So then you have the base URL that you can override, and you could set that to the environment variable that the dev tools, that the dev tunnels provide. So whenever you start your application with dev tunnels will pass in this environment variable. And this is a feature that I requested myself, and they were kind enough to add. And this is a really useful thing, because sometimes you need to know what the current URL is of your dev tunnels. So this, by specifying this override, that would also get the job done. But I personally like to use the forwarded headers. Just make sure that you read through the documentation to secure these as well. All right, let's get back. See what else I was going to talk about. So security. All right, alternatives.
Someone is asking, like, is this code just to work with dev tunnel?
So to specify that base URL override with that environment variable is specifically to dev tunnels. But the forwarded headers will work with any reverse proxy, and dev tunnels is, in this case, a reverse proxy. And so this would also work with Ngrok and whatever other tunnel solution that you're using.
And then they have a follow-up about when you're not using dev tunnel. So like when you're in production, does that change anything?
Yeah, so when you're in production, if you are using a reverse proxy, you would want to use the forwarded headers options as well. You do want to make sure, I think there's like some other options on here where you can say known proxies, and then so you're using like a whitelist or an accept list to say, hey, these are the proxies, the reverse proxies that I know, and so I only want to accept HTTP requests from those, or update the current request with those. And that way, whatever reverse proxy would be in front of, it would use the correct host.
And we have one more question about, so if you're adding environment variables, does that mean that we can have multiple projects simultaneously using dev tunnels?
You can have multiple projects using dev tunnels, and each of those projects will have that environment variable set as that. So this environment variable, if you run it in this project and then you have a separate project that also has this code, they will actually return different dev tunnel URLs. So the environment variable is updated correctly per project. Now, if you want to make HTTP requests from one project to another, there's also other environment variables that are set. but you have to suffix it with the project name, so other project name. So say that I want to get to the dev terminal URL of another project, so that I can send like HTTP request to it. Then you would do it like this. You would make sure that you suffix it with the other project name. And that's also in the documentation of one of the dev tunnel blog posts.
All right, I think.
Let's see. So I've been manually configuring the dev tunnel, but you can also automatically configure the dev tunnel, the webhook URL. So I'm gonna comment this code, and that I was hiding before. So using that same environment variable, I'm going to update the webhook URL on the Twilio phone number automatically. So I'm getting the dev tunnel URL, then I'm getting the Twilio REST client, which comes from the libraries that I've added. And then I'm going to use this incoming phone number resource to update that phone number, which I stored the ID of that phone number in configuration. But the most important part here is this URI. So I'm grabbing the dev tunnel URL, and then I'm adding the path that will resolve to my endpoint. So when I run the code now, well, let me remove it here, so you can actually see the difference. And I'm going to run the code again. And now that that code has run, it should have updated that URL, the webhook URL again. There we go. So this can be very helpful in case you don't want to use the web interface and you want everything to be as automated as possible, especially if you're working with teammates and maybe this is their first time onboarding. This is just another step that you can avoid. Now, I said that there's some alternatives to dev tunnels, and now why would you want to use alternatives when there's when this is built into Visual Studio? So when you're using Visual Studio, I think dev tunnels is probably the best solution, but this is currently only in Visual Studio 2022. Maybe you're using an older version of Visual Studio. It's only available on Visual Studio proper, the Windows version of Visual Studio. And it's only available for ASP.NET Core applications. Now, these things could change in the future as it gets more popular, and I'm not sure what's on the roadmap. But that's what was currently supported. So if you're using Node.js on Windows, then you'll need to use a different solution. If you're using Visual Studio for Mac or VS Code, anything on Linux or on Mac, then you'll have to use a different solution. But there are a lot of other free and paid solutions for this. And most popularly is Ngrok. So Ngrok is a cross-platform command line utility. You can really quickly drop it in, download it, and then start tunneling, creating secure tunnels. So this is your command that you would be using for that. So I'm going to turn off my dev tunnels and look at the URL that I want to be using. So I'm going to use this HTTP URL, and then I'm going to open a new terminal, say Ngrok HTTP, and paste in that URL. And then when I hit enter, let me stop the other tunnel that I already have running, because I was running this from my desktop. All right. So let me run this tunnel, and now you'll see this forwarding URL, which is the same as like a dev tunnel URL. And this forwarding URL is the public URL that will forward any HTTP requests to your local host here. Now, if I update this in the Twilio console and then hit message, let me put a breakpoint here. And just checking, okay, my dev tunnels are off. If I send a text message, this should still work. There we go. So this is kind of like an instant replacement for DevTunnels in case you can't use DevTunnels. And maybe you use DevTunnels, but your teammates use a different operating system. So you can still work together using Ngrok. Now, one cool thing about Ngrok is that it also has this web interface. And so you can see the requests that came in and inspect them. And you can also replay them. So that's a pretty cool feature. And then they also have an API. So you could locally query this API, get this, let me find the public URL, like get this public URL by querying the API, and then automatically update the webhook URL from code. All right, Ngrok also has this useful website which talks about webhooks. So it has a webhook directory where you can see all the different webhook providers. Probably not all that are in the world, but definitely a good list of them. And what's pretty interesting is they list the security features that they have and the security, the hashing algorithms that they're using. And so this is like a repository of all the different webhooks. And you can quickly see, what kind of security that they use. You can also learn about all of these different security methods. And then there are some best practices in case you want to be a webhook provider, you want other people to integrate with your system, or best practices for consumers. So I would definitely recommend checking this out. All right. Then one more shout out for the Twilio blog. We have awesome .NET content there, and then on my own website as well, I write about .NET there as well. So that's everything I had to share.
That was awesome. Thank you. I personally learned a lot because I haven't done like that kind of work with webhooks and like calling APIs from my code. So and I think people were really engaged. I wonder if people have more questions to Niels that we might answer while we still have him here. Or Sasso or Cam, if you do have other questions too.
So I have a question. So you've worked with both Ngrok and the new Visual Studio tunneling. What's your preference and why?
So I like DevTunnels just a tad more, especially when I'm using Visual Studio, just because it's integrated into the IDE. I don't have to really start it or stop it. It just it's already in my workflow. I hit that start button and it already starts automatically with my project. And getting that webhook URL from the environment variable is really, webhook URL, the DevTunnel URL from that environment variable is really convenient. As with Ngrok, you would actually have to, send some HTTP requests to that local host API and then query the XML or the JSON. And so it's doable, but it's just more work than it's just an environment variable. So I do like DevTunnels more.
Yeah, I love the fact that it's integrated into the IDE, and I think that all makes it very easy to do. I think I'd love to see something like a command line version or something like that. Because I think about my environment, like I haven't used Windows for dev in like 10 years. I don't use Visual Studio properly. Mm-hmm. So for me, it's just like, oh, okay, that's cool, but I can't use it. You know what I mean? And so like when we see dev tools like this, I'm always like, oh, okay, but like, can everyone use it? You know what I mean? Or is this like a paid Visual Studio thing? You know what I mean? Or, like how do I use it, right? Like if it's not on VS for Mac, it's not in VS Code, does it run on the command line? It's cool for you Windows folks, but for me, I'm just like, oh, left out again. I'll wait until 2025, whenever my turn comes around, I guess.
So just to make sure this is clear, as far as I know, it's part of the community version. So it's part of all the Visual Studio versions, not the paid version, not just the paid version. So that's neat, but it isn't on VS for Mac and VS Code, so that is a problem if you're on those platforms. But hopefully this feature gets popular enough so when Microsoft sees that maybe it's useful to add in VS Code and VS for Mac.
What would be some other features that you personally would love to see added to it as it is right now?
Yeah, that dashboard to see the requests that came in the past and to be able to replay them is really useful. Because I've been sending this SMS using streaming my phone, but maybe I just have to do this once, and then I could replay them over and over again, which is really useful. But it's also just really useful to be able to inspect the HTTP requests that came in.
Right.
Yeah, and Syed is confirming that dev tunnels are available in all SKUs. So yeah, I imagine, and like some of the things between, I don't know what the team plans are, but usually Visual Studio for Mac, for example, the features are later added. They're not always in parity, so that's something maybe folks can request to the Visual Studio for Mac team. And then for Visual Studio Code, I imagine that we'd have to have a new extension added there for this. There's someone like asking, can you create a custom URL? So can you customize that URL that is generated?
So Syed is in the chat, who works on this product, so he can answer that. As far as I know, I don't think so.
Yeah. We're a few seconds ahead of the chat, so if Syed's still out there, he's probably typing right now.
We'll wait. Maybe we can get the answer.
I know for Ngrok you can customize it, but not in the free version. And in the free version, you can't get a permanent URL either. So you can't get like a permanent tunnel.
All right, so we got our answer. So Syed said no support for custom URLs at this time. We're looking into it. There's also a good question here in terms that you mentioned, like you show the dashboard that Ngrok has. So does that tunnel has that? Otherwise, it's a future request for Syed.
Yeah, that's my request as well. I think it's an awesome thing to have, but currently it doesn't have it.
Yeah, and Syed mentioned that they're also looking at the request inspection replay as well. So that's great. Awesome. Thanks for all the questions that are coming in.
I think I saw one question earlier that asked about Cloudflare tunnels.
Yeah, I was trying to find this one.
And so yeah, that's another alternative. There's a lot, and that one is pretty interesting because it uses your Cloudflare DNS, and so by using your Cloudflare DNS, you actually can use your own URL, and then that's permanent, which is useful. But you got to be using Cloudflare DNS already for your website. So I have used it, and it's cool. I have a tutorial for it if you would like to try it.
You're a walking encyclopedia.
Only for like this very specific thing, webhooks.
Awesome. All right. I think like we're coming to the end of the show, so I think we can wrap this up now. So we're gonna be returning next Monday, February 6th, 9 a.m. Pacific, with Tim Purdon. I think that's gonna be another cool show. He's gonna be talking about mapping and GIS data apps in Blazor with GeoBlazor. So I'm excited to see what that show is gonna be looking like. And with that, we can wrap it up. And so thank you so much, Niels, for being with us today. And thank you everyone for watching. Check out all of the other .NET Live TV streams and videos at .net/live. If you go to the .NET website, You're gonna see like the blinking light right now. So when we're live, it shows you. And with that, I thank you all so much for hanging out, and please submit your shows as well. We want the community. Niels has been here multiple times, and we want to hear what other interesting, cool projects you are working on. So please join us next time. Thank you.